I don't really expect anyone to believe me. I wouldn't if I were in your place. I barely believe myself, and I was there. I lived it, or I thought I did. The passage of time has not brought clarity, only more questions, more waking hours staring into dim corners trying to recall details that dissolve like fog under scrutiny. Maybe if I tell it all, every last fraying thread, I can lay it to rest. Or maybe I'll just scatter it further into the dark. It started the year I moved into the old caretaker's cottage by the woods. A friend of mine, Tom, had been managing the property for some absentee owners who lived overseas. They were apparently rich enough to own more houses than they could live in, and this one, tucked at the edge of a defunct estate deep in the hills, had been left to weather quietly for decades. They were looking for someone to live there and keep the place from falling into complete ruin. Tom offered me the job. Cheap rent, isolation, and no real duties beyond basic maintenance. I took it. I told myself I was running toward solitude, toward peace and quiet. But if I'm honest, I was running away. From the city, from people, from myself in some vague and shifting way I couldn't yet name. I'd been unraveling for months before the move. Panic attacks had begun to claw their way into my chest like fists through old plaster. Sounds were too loud, light too sharp. People's faces seemed like masks. I had become a cracked mirror version of myself, and the only remedy I could think of was to disappear into the woods and go still. The cottage was older than I'd expected. Stone walls with deep sills and crooked beams, a wood stove that smoked no matter how I arranged the flue, floors that sloped with the tired dignity of time. The surrounding woods were dense and full of narrow, winding paths that hadn't been walked in years. There was a strange hush to everything, even in daylight. No distant drone of highways, no airplanes overhead, just the muffled shiver of wind through pine needles and the occasional cry of some unseen bird. At first, I welcomed it. I slept more in the first 2 weeks than I had in the last 6 months. My body was grateful, my mind less so. Dreams started changing almost immediately. They weren't nightmares exactly, but they carried a strange weight, like dreams dreamed by someone else. I'd wake up with words in my mouth I hadn't spoken, images in my mind that didn't belong to me. A tower of black glass, a hole in the sky, a face made of smoke. There was a single window in the bedroom that looked out toward the forest, and sometimes I'd wake to find it open, even though I never opened it myself. The latch was old, but firm. Still, I would rise in the middle of the night to cold air on my neck and find the window ajar, curtains breathing in the stillness. I told myself it was just the wind, the old frame slipping with time. But there was a pattern to it. Always around 3 in the morning, always silent, like something was checking in. The forest itself began to feel stranger the more I walked it. The trees were tall and thin, growing so close they seemed to lean together in quiet conspiracy. I followed old trails that looped and crossed and sometimes vanished entirely. Once I thought I came across the remains of an old structure, just a scatter of moss-covered stones and a depression in the ground. I bent to look more closely and felt suddenly, inexplicably dizzy, as if I were standing at the edge of a great drop. When I straightened, I thought I saw a figure among the trees. Just for a second. A suggestion of a man. No, not even that. Just the space where a man could have been, had he chosen to be seen. I turned back early that day. The days blurred. I spent most of them reading by the fire or walking the woods. Time grew soft at the edges. I stopped checking the calendar. My phone, useless as it was out there, eventually ran out of battery and I never bothered to recharge it. There was something satisfying in letting go of it all. The internet, the news, the endless clamor of opinions and outrage. The world narrowed to trees and stone and the quiet tick of my own thoughts. But thoughts, when given too much silence, begin to twist. I started hearing things. Not voices, not clearly. More like the suggestion of language, a rhythm beneath the wind, the sound of something pacing just beyond the visible line of trees. The tapping of fingers against glass, though I had no neighbors, no visitors. I would sit still and hold my breath, listening. It was never there when I moved toward it, always just out of reach. The strangest thing, though, was the mirror. There was only one in the cottage, above the old sink in the bathroom. It was the sort of mirror that turns your face unfamiliar, wavy glass, tarnished edges. But one night, brushing my teeth, I saw something behind me. Not a figure, not movement even, just a slight change in the way the room looked. An extension, almost, as though the mirror showed a little more than the actual space allowed. A second door where there was none. A stretch of hallway that didn't exist. I spun around, heart hammering, but of course there was nothing. Just the sink, the wall, the narrow old door creaking softly on its hinges. I leaned in close. My reflection leaned closer. There was something about my eyes, wrong somehow. A delay, an echo of expression that didn't quite match. I held up my hand, and the reflection followed, but it felt choreographed, like a dance I'd rehearsed too long. I turned away, and the room felt colder than it had a moment before. I stopped using the bathroom mirror after that, covered it with a towel. Wasn't worth it. I wish I could tell you I left right then, packed a bag, called Tom, walked out into the day, and never looked back. But I didn't. That's not how it works. When things slip, they do so quietly, gradually. You doubt your own senses first. You make excuses. The mind bends to avoid breaking. I started keeping a journal, hoping to track these oddities, to ground myself. The first entries are mundane. What I ate, what the weather was like, how far I walked. But slowly they shifted. I began recording dreams, strange thoughts. Once I wrote a whole page in handwriting that wasn't mine. Sharp, tight loops, a language I didn't recognize. I tore it out and burned it in the stove. But the next day, the same page appeared again. Blank this time, but still warm to the touch. I told myself it was just a mistake, that I must have imagined burning it, that I'd confused one page for another. But it stuck with me. That warmth, the faintest smell of ash. I stopped journaling after that. It felt like writing it down gave it more shape, more room to grow. The air in the cottage began to feel heavy, as though I were breathing through a layer of gauze. I'd sit by the stove at night and find myself unable to move for long stretches of time, as if something was gently pressing down on my shoulders, my chest. Not painful, just insistent, like a hand encouraging stillness, encouraging silence. My thoughts during those times were not my own. I'd find myself considering things I never had before, strange, elaborate ideas about doors between worlds, about thin places where reality frays. Not ideas I believed exactly, but ones that came with a peculiar certainty, like memories long buried.
The forest changed with the season. Autumn slipped in, and the leaves turned brittle and red, falling in soft, ceaseless drifts. The world grew quieter still. The wind grew colder, shadows longer. One afternoon, I walked deeper into the woods than usual, following a path I didn't remember ever noticing before. It was narrow and overgrown, and the deeper I went, the more the trees leaned in, narrowing the sky. I thought I heard something following me. Footsteps, though soft and perfectly matched to mine. I stopped and turned. Nothing. Not even bird song. The quiet was absolute. I should have turned back then. I know that. But there was something in the air that day, a kind of pull. I don't have better words for it. I just know I kept going, though my heart was beating too fast and my mouth had gone dry. Eventually, the path opened into a small clearing I'd never seen before. In the center was a low, circular wall, stone, moss-covered, partially collapsed. A well, I thought, or what had once been one. There was no sign of water, just blackness within. I stepped closer, slowly, unable to help myself. It wasn't fear that held me. Not then. It was fascination, pure and deep and absolute, like the well had been waiting for me. I stood at its edge and looked in. The darkness seemed to shift ever so slightly, as if something inside was stirring. I couldn't see the bottom, couldn't hear anything, but I had the overwhelming sensation of being watched, not from below, but from all sides, as if the forest had noticed me in that moment for the first time, and wasn't sure yet what to make of me. I left then, as slowly as I could manage, never turning my back on the well. When I reached the edge of the clearing, I thought I saw something shift at the far side, a flicker of motion, the vaguest outline of a figure, again not quite seen, more intuited, but I didn't stop. I walked straight home, keeping my eyes forward, pretending I'd seen nothing. That night, I dreamt of the well. In the dream, I climbed down into it. There were footholds carved into the stone, slick with moss. I descended until the light above shrank to a pinprick, and the dark swallowed everything. Then I stopped. Something was waiting at the bottom. I couldn't see it, but I felt it, enormous, slow breathing, patient. It spoke, but not in words. It spoke in images. A house with no doors, a clock with no hands, a sky torn open like paper. I woke up gasping, my hands clenched into fists, so tight my nails had drawn blood. After that, I started hearing the tapping again. Not just at night, during the day too. Always from another room, always just faint enough to be doubted. I would enter the kitchen and hear it in the bedroom. I'd step into the hall and it would shift to the attic. Tap, tap, tap. Like a Morse code I didn't understand. I tried not to follow it. I told myself it was the house settling or a bird on the roof, but there was no rhythm to it, no randomness either. It was deliberate. It wanted something. The mirror in the bathroom stayed covered, but sometimes, when I walked past, I'd hear whispering from behind the towel, not loud, not even decipherable, just a soft stream of sibilant sounds like someone speaking underwater. I never uncovered it again. Instead, I started avoiding the bathroom entirely, using a bucket in the shed. It was easier, safer somehow. I began to eat less, sleep less. The stove grew harder to light. The woods seemed to grow closer to the house, the branches scraping the windows at night like nails. I began to see things in the corners of my vision, shapes, figures, just barely there, always gone when I turned to look. I stopped walking the woods. I stopped leaving the house at all. And then the photographs arrived. I never heard anyone approach, but one morning I found a small envelope slid under the door. Inside were photographs, old, colorless, curling at the edges. All of them showed the same clearing, the same stone well, taken from different angles. In each one, a different figure stood at the edge. Their faces were blurred, their shapes indistinct. But in the final photo, the figure was me. I dropped the envelope and did not pick it up again. That night, the tapping turned to knocking, soft, insistent, from the back door. I did not move. It went on for hours. I fell asleep with the blanket pulled over my head like a child hiding from a thunderstorm. When I woke, the door was open. Just a crack, just enough. Something had been inside. I don't know what. I found muddy footprints in the hall. Not boots, not bare feet either. Something in between, long, narrow, with too many toes. I burned sage, I lit candles, I recited every half-remembered prayer I could dig out of the depths of childhood. Nothing helped. The knocking continued each night, sometimes from the back, sometimes from the front, sometimes the roof. And I stopped dreaming altogether. Or at least, I stopped remembering. I would go to sleep and wake up with hours missing. My fingernails would be caked with dirt, my feet wet, leaves in my bed. Once I woke with the scent of the well's mossy stone on my skin and a single word scrawled across my wall in charcoal, below. I don't know why I stayed. No, that's a lie. I stayed because I wasn't sure I could leave. Not anymore. The road out felt further each day. The trees along the path loomed higher, seemed to lean in closer. The map I kept in the drawer looked different each time I checked it, paths branching where there had been none, destinations shifted slightly off-kilter. My compass spun lazily, as if drunk. I wrote Tom a letter, tried to explain that something was wrong, that I needed to leave, that the house wasn't just old, it was something else, but I never sent it. I found it later, days later, opened and folded into the firewood pile, though I had no memory of putting it there. I began to forget things. Not just little things, big things. My own birthday, my parents' names, the year. I looked in the mirror, once, an old shard of glass I'd found in the woodshed, and didn't recognize my own face. I looked older, thinner. My eyes were sunken, rimmed in gray. My lips cracked and bloodless. I stared for a long time, waiting for something to move that shouldn't. And then I heard it again. Not tapping this time, not knocking. A voice. Calling my name. At first it was faint, like a trick of the wind, but it was unmistakable. My name, spoken softly, almost lovingly, the way a mother might call a child in from play. It came from the direction of the woods, from where the well was. I stood frozen in the hallway, my breath shallow and my hands shaking, because something in me, a deep, buried part I didn't even know existed, wanted to answer. Not just answer, follow. It took all my will not to move. I stayed inside until the sun rose, though it offered no comfort anymore. The house was not warm with light. It absorbed it, swallowed it. Shadows clung to the corners no matter how many lamps I lit. And always now there was the whisper at the edge of hearing, not in one place, but everywhere. In the walls, beneath the floorboards, inside me. I think that's when I began to understand it wasn't the house, not entirely. It wasn't the woods, it wasn't the well. It was me. Or rather, it had chosen me. I don't know what it is. I don't think it's something that can be named, but I felt its attention. Like standing in the center of a vast, unseen eye. It had been watching, waiting, and now it was closer.
It's difficult to describe the change that happened next. It wasn't a moment. It was a drift, like a raft slowly untethering from the shore. I stopped being certain of what was real. I would hear voices behind closed doors and open them to empty rooms. I would light a candle and return moments later to find it melted to a stub, wax pooled on the floor. Time didn't move the way it used to. Sometimes it ran backward. One evening, I think it was evening, though the sky never fully brightened or darkened anymore, I looked out the window and saw myself standing at the edge of the trees. Just standing, watching the house. I didn't panic. I didn't run. I just stood and watched back, because by then I understood. There was no leaving. There was no outside. The line between me and it had blurred. The forest had crept into me, or I into it. We had folded into each other like pages in a book no one had written. That night, I uncovered the bathroom mirror. Not because I wanted to see, but because I needed to. The towel slipped to the floor with a sound like tearing cloth, though it was only fabric brushing tile. I stood in front of the mirror and stared. My reflection stared back, but it was waiting. I don't know how I knew, but I did. It was waiting for something. I raised my hand slowly. It didn't move. I turned and walked out. I left the mirror uncovered. I think I wanted it to watch me. The knocking stopped after that. So did the dreams. Instead, there was only waking. Endless, gray waking. I stopped eating entirely, not because I was afraid of the food or because I couldn't cook, but because I no longer needed it. Hunger became theoretical. My stomach shrank and disappeared. My breath was shallow but sufficient. My heartbeat slowed until I could barely feel it. And then came the second letter. No envelope this time. Just a single sheet of parchment on the kitchen table when I woke. Heavy paper. Strange texture. The words written in that same tight, sharp hand from my journal, but this time I could read them. You are almost ready. That's all it said. I don't know how many days passed after that. The sun no longer seemed to rise or fall. There was only a dull smear of light that came and went without rhythm. The trees outside pressed against the windows like curious strangers. The floorboards grew warm underfoot, as if something beneath them breathed. Then the voices changed. They stopped calling my name. Instead, they began to whisper things I couldn't remember hearing but somehow knew were true. They told me where I'd been before I was born. They told me where I would go when I was no longer myself. They whispered secrets not of the world, but of the space between things, the silence between words, the darkness behind sight. And they whispered about the well. I returned there in the end. Of course I did. There was never any other way this was going to end. I think I knew it even that first day when I saw the clearing. I made the walk barefoot. The forest parted for me, or maybe it pressed closer. I couldn't tell anymore. My body was thin and brittle, but I moved easily. The air was thick with rot and sweetness, like something overripe. Time stuttered as I walked. My footsteps echoed in directions that didn't exist. The well was waiting. It hadn't changed. Stones slick with moss, darkness within. But now I could feel it breathing, a slow, deliberate inhalation that tugged at the edges of me. Not my clothes, not my body. Me. I stood at the edge and looked down, and the void looked back, and I understood. It wasn't a well. It had never been a well. It was an opening, a wound in the world, a mouth that spoke in thoughts and dreams and hungers. It was where the voices came from, where the other me had climbed out, where the names of things go to be forgotten, and it wanted me to come home. So I climbed in. The stones were cold and wet, but my hands held fast. I descended slowly, reverently. I did not look up. I did not look down. I only moved. Time folded. Space bent. The walls trembled. The air grew warmer, then colder, then warmer again. I passed shapes in the stone, faces, hands, words etched in a language I almost remembered. Some glowed faintly. Some wept. And then I reached the bottom, or what I thought was the bottom. It wasn't a floor. It was a threshold. There was something beyond, not a room, not a cave, something wider than space, a place that wasn't a place. I stepped into it, and it stepped into me. I don't remember what happened next, only that I became very quiet. When I woke, or whatever the word is for it, I was back in the cottage. Everything looked the same, but it wasn't. The walls breathed with me. The windows wept at dawn. The fire in the stove no longer needed wood. The mirror reflected not my face, but the one who had stood at the edge of the trees, and I could feel the well inside me now, not metaphorically, literally. A gravity, a hunger, a presence. I don't sleep, I don't eat, I don't breathe the way you do. I am the house now. I am the forest. I am the echo beneath the words you whisper to yourself in the dark. I write this only because I know someone will find it. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. When the walls thin again, when the veil lifts, when the path reappears beneath the fallen leaves, you'll find the clearing. You'll feel the pull. You'll look down into the dark and feel something look back. Don't climb in. Not unless you're ready to forget your name. Not unless you're ready to hear it again from something that isn't your voice. Not unless you're ready to understand what it means to never be alone again. Not truly. Not ever. Because once it sees you, you're already part of it.